Well, all right, Karla Downing, welcome back to the program.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm for those who maybe don't know you, I'm just going to ask them to go to changeyourrelationship.com, find out all about you there. They can also even look in our archives because you've been on multiple times. I
Mhm.
really want to just dive into this topic because I feel like there is so much good information here, so much good hopeful content that you can bring about this idea of helping wives of sexually addicted husbands to understand the grief process. So why don't you just set it up for us? What are we looking
Okay.
at here, and where are we going to go in these stages for wives dealing with this?
Okay. Just one clarification. It's changemyrelationship.com so
I'm
that they can
sorry.
at least find it. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, grief process. The grief process was originally written about by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was studying people who were diagnosed with a terminal illness. And when she came up with these 5 stages, and the acronym that I use for it is DABDA.
Mm-hmm.
And DABDA meaning for denial, and then anger, and then bargaining, and depression, and acceptance. But we're going to add another one to it today, and we're going to end on hope. So your prayer was absolutely perfect. We are going to end with hope, because after acceptance comes hope. And that's hope for reconciliation, hope for healing, hope for change. But those stages, when they were originally talked about for people with a terminal illness, then people started to realize, oh my gosh, like that applies not just to terminal illness, but anytime you have a significant loss. And if you become very familiar with the grief process and you're aware of yourself going through it, as I am, you will notice that we have it kind of in a compressed, quicker form anytime that we suffer a loss or a disappointment or something that happens. Like I can tell recently I had to cancel my annual ski trip. And I went through it with that. I was like, no, I'm hanging on. I was telling my
Mm-hmm.
doctors, I'm going, and my family, I'm going. And they were like, no, you're not. I was like, that was my denial. And
Yeah.
so, you go through it for everything. So, but when it comes to big things, like discovering your spouse's sexual addiction or discovering an affair, it is a very deep process. But if you understand that you are going to go through it and you recognize it, it is going to make it, one, much more productive, and two, it's going to give you the ability to give yourself grace. But for the men out there, I want them to listen to this, and I want them to
Mm-hmm.
understand what their wives are going through, because they are, in this thing, when you have couples that are doing that, they are reacting to each other. I mean, he's just as destabilized and insecure and fearful and all that stuff that she is right now, and they're going to react to each other. So I want him to understand what she's going through, and I'm going to throw in a few things today to help the wives understand what the husband is going through at different processes, so that they can recognize it and work together. So the first one, they all know, they're here and they've felt this one big time. And that one is the denial. And the denial comes when you have the discovery of the addiction or the discovery of an affair. And they may have had suspicions prior to this. They may have seen things and not, really been able to put it together. But when you finally are presented with the reality, it's overwhelming. It is absolutely destabilizing. And you're dealing with that and you're thinking, is this true? And then you go through this little process of, oh my gosh, this sexual addiction. My husband has a sexual addiction. My husband is involved in an affair. Or at the same time, then you go through, no, he's not. No, it's not. It can't be true. It can't be true. This can't be my reality. And you can go back and forth with this for quite a large amount of time. You may notice yourself thinking just continually about it, you may notice that when you wake up in the night to get a drink of water, or when you wake up in the morning, the first thing that hits you is like this flood of these thoughts of what's going on or what you found out, or then you'll be going back in this no, 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 yes, yes. It may be difficult to put your shoes on, to figure out what to wear, difficult to process life, difficult to get your kids dressed for school, to keep your schedule, to keep your job. This is literally, it's an emotional thing, but it's also a thing that your brain does in order to wrap yourself around a truth that is difficult to deal with. Now, our body goes through this when we have an injury. Our body goes into a shock with the injury, and in that shock, it cushions us from the pain. For a while, we have this massive surge of, adrenaline and norepinephrine, where that keeps us from actually feeling the intense pain. It is protective. Denial is protective. It allows you to deal with huge, deep, difficult information and come in and out of it in almost a grace way of dealing with it, not dealing with it, dealing with it, not dealing with it. And it can last for a good amount of time as you're trying to wrap your mind and your emotions around this new, shocking, disabling information.
Can I ask a question about that? Because I think
Yes.
what you're talking about is so normal, but because sometimes grief can be so sort of overwhelming, overpowering, the disclosure and all of that. Can you talk about how important it is in this first stage for a wife to really listen to her body's signals in terms of some of that fatigue and some of those, the highs and the lows of that?
Absolutely. That's why I said understanding it and recognizing, okay, this is shock. One of the things that you need to tell yourself during that time is, I have to allow myself to do this, and I'm not going to be able to figure this out right now, because that's part of the thing, is getting the disclosure and then, oh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? No, you can't figure all out right now what you're going to do. You're not there. You're literally trying to figure out how to cope with new information. So yeah, self-care is huge. Maybe you do need to take a little bit of a break from work, or make your life simpler, or literally ask for help for some people. Maybe even allow your husband to do more. I know you're going to be mad at him shortly, but you might, whatever it is to take care of yourself, recognizing that you're not going to solve it now. You don't have the answers. You're not going to figure it out. You just need, it's almost like survival at the beginning. It's like, it would be finding out about somebody's death. And figuring out, I just have to figure out. It's why people bring people meals when they find out, when somebody close died, because you can't do your normal life stuff. You have to have outside support. So just lots of grace, lots of self-care, agreed, as much as possible. I mean, sleep might be disrupted. You might want to ask your doctor for sleeping medication for short term, just to give yourself the ability to rest. And you might want to ask your doctor for anti-anxiety medication, because you might find yourself incredibly anxious and unable to function because of that. So yes.
And also just being able to tell yourself, like you're saying, it's okay. It's okay to say, I can't do this right now. It's okay to say, I need to sleep. It's okay to say, kind of, you talk about the grace, right? You've got to be permission in that to say, my body is telling me I can't do what I normally do.
Yes.
And that's really important, right?
Yep. And then the husband can be seeing this, and he's fearful. As the disclosure comes out, he feels insecure, he's worried, he's fearful, he's going through all this stuff. And so he's got to recognize, what I can do for her right now is I can just support her. I can just help as much as possible. Maybe I should take the kids to school, just those things and not push he at all times through this, he's thinking, make me feel better, help me know it's going to be okay. And right now she's just got to she's in shock. Now, during the shock time, there may be periods where even though she's going through that shock, some anger is going to break through. And in her moments of where she's like, oh my gosh, it's real, that she just might be like, why did you do this? What's going on? I can't believe you did this. So there might be some of that, but the main thing is that denial is going to come back in, and that feeling of just, I don't know if this is my real reality. And then what happens is you switch into the anger, and then it's like, oh, I'm mad that this is my reality.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to comment on about maybe the denial stage. I've heard a lot of wives say that in that stage, especially, it's almost as if they feel a numbness that
Yes.
comes across them. Can you describe that a little bit?
Yes. That is the emotional numbness that I think in God's grace is protection. It is the same thing as your body numbing you to intense physical pain. If you're in a severe accident and you're severely injured, people will say, I don't feel the pain after a gunshot wound for a while. It's your body numbing you to the pain. This is your emotional psyche, your emotions, your brain, unconsciously just putting you automatically into this numbness. That is the shock. And the numbness is a grace. It's a grace of saying, this is too overwhelming for you. Your whole psyche knows this is too overwhelming for you. You cannot deal with the reality of this right now. As you're just beginning to absorb this, I'm going to allow you to not feel all these feelings that you will feel later. Because you have to remember, the shock is your world, your life, your marriage as you thought it was is not. So you are wrapping your head around the fact that it's what you thought was real was not. So it's like your world is turned upside down. To wrap your mind, your emotions, your spirit around all of that is not something you can do instantly. So you're in that state of just, yes, being numb, not feeling. And that's why you're just sort of barely walking around, not really even connected sometimes, feeling kind of disconnected. But you will feel the struggle of it's real, it's not real, it's real, it's not real. And your brain is going to be doing, some of that also.
And then comes anger, right?
Oh, then comes anger. And anger is the reality of, this is true. This really happened. And the anger, now there's two things will happen. And this is the other reason I like, especially got to really talk about this, especially among Christians, because we kind of have this belief that we shouldn't be angry as Christians, and that anger is wrong, and that anger is sinful, and that we need to forgive. So right here, when the wife comes to the situation where she recognizes reality, if she comes in or someone comes in and says to her, and I've had Christian therapists tell wives, okay, you need to forgive. And it would be absolutely not beneficial to the husband, the wife, or the marriage for the wife to instantly forgive here. If you don't feel the anger, it will go under and it will be unresolved, and it will come out in other ways. The anger is what helps you literally work through the stages. If you don't work through them, you do not have a healthy resolution and resolve. So the anger can be intense. The anger is going to be directed toward your husband. How could you do this? Then the anger is going to be directed toward yourself. How could I have missed this? How stupid was I to not see that he was up late, that the computer was like he was on there late at night? How stupid was I not to believe that 1 or 2 or 3 times that I found pornography on the computer, that I didn't tell him, I discounted it, I believed his lies? How stupid was I? So you're going to have a lot of anger toward yourself. You're going to have anger toward God. You're disillusioned, like, God, wait, whoa. You brought me this man. This is a Christian marriage. I did everything right. I submitted to him. I did these things. I was a good wife. How could you allow this to happen? So the anger could be at people. It could be at the father who allowed the pornography to be in the home when he was a child. It could be around to the brother who showed it to him. It could be toward all kinds of people that you sense that are involved. And the anger is intense, and it is okay to feel it, and it is good to feel it. The anger is, we know, righteous anger. We know from, first of all, anger is a human emotion. And why is it a human emotion? Because it's a God emotion. We're created in his image. God feels anger. When God saw Israel betraying him and being unfaithful, he was angry. He even talked about, and one time he even divorced Israel. We have that in the Old Testament where God said, I'm done with them. And he would hold off his anger, and then he would give them another chance. And then finally he was like, I'm done. I'm divorcing them. And God felt that. So we can feel that. That anger allows you to process the pain, the loss. It's saying this was not right. This was wrong, and it is wrong. And it's okay to say it's wrong. And you get to feel that and allow yourself to feel it. Now, does that mean that you get to rip your husband apart? No, not helpful. Okay. Is it that the husband gets to get mad at her because she's angry and she's telling him, now it's very hard not to, but you've got to just realize, okay, here's healthy anger. I will allow you to tell me how angry you are and how upset you are and how hard this is for you, but you don't get to call names. You don't get to be verbally abusive. You don't need to, you don't want to do it in front of other people. You don't want to do it in front of the kids. You don't want to, all of that. So the anger is the anger over the betrayal. And it's the anger over, I don't want to be here. I don't want to be in this place. I don't want to have to be dealing with this.
So let me ask a question, because I know that I actually like to tell Christians, did you know God commands us to be angry? He says, be angry, but don't sin.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about just the because all of it is very just jumbled in a woman's mind and a heart. Can you talk about helping a wife be able to recognize where she is having just anger, like righteous anger, and where her anger is maybe starting to be self-directed in a shaming way? And how can she kind of continue to press into the reality of the righteous anger that is true and good, but be careful of the negative anger that can then be causing shame or going beyond righteous anger towards her husband? Can you talk a little bit about kind of where that line is and how she can balance that as best as possible?
And that's a tough one, but righteous anger is anger at the sin, anger at the unjustness of something, anger at the wrongness of it. Unrighteous anger is wanting to get revenge and hurt the other person. So yes, you want to hurt your husband as badly as he hurt you. And the intensity of the anger is going to be equivalent to the intensity of what it is that he did, right? I mean, if it was 35 years of betrayal, that's going to be a lot of anger. There's going to be a lot that's going to come out, but it crosses the line when it becomes destructive. It becomes destructive towards your husband, when it becomes destructive towards you, when you hate yourself because you didn't notice this, you didn't see this, when you are beating yourself up, when you are beating him up, when you're tearing him apart, when you're tearing yourself apart, not helpful.
And so then as she's moving through anger, what does it look like to try to process that to get to whatever, to get to the next stage of bargaining? Or are those things very overlapped?
Well, all of this, we have this in 5 stages. They're not perfectly divided.
Yeah, they're not sequential necessarily, right?
Yes,
yeah.
They're not necessarily even sequential. They kind of are, but one of the things that happens is you'll go back and forth. And one of the messy things with sexual betrayal is that as different disclosure comes out and as different information comes out, then you're gonna go backwards. When you find out some new information, you're going to go back into some of the denial. and then you might go back and you're going to go back into some of the anger before you go into the next thing. So this is all going to be, but if you're aware of it, like I said, you can know, okay, I'm going to expect myself to be really angry. The other thing that's interesting that happens with anger is sometimes we don't feel the anger until somebody gives us permission or validates what we went through. And then you can find, like you might find, I'm not really angry until I go to the therapist and the therapist says, wow, that's a lot of pain. And then you're like, oh yeah, it is. Whew, there it comes, right? You know? So, but yeah, so the intertwine, it is intertwined. You do kind of go back and forth, but if you are aware, you will recognize the distinct phases. So when you go from anger to bargaining is almost a little bit of the shock denial, but now at a little safer stage. The bargaining is basically your psyche, your spirit, your soul saying, how could I have prevented this? How could this have not happened? Now, this is, if you recognize we are on our way to acceptance, you will recognize how important bargaining is, because bargaining is basically saying, your psyche is saying, I'm going to figure out, I don't want to accept this. I don't want this to be my reality. So I'm going to try to figure out, how could this have been prevented? So then you go through this deeper level of kind of that, and you say, okay, God, why didn't you tell me about this earlier? Why didn't you allow me to notice it? If only I would have noticed it. If only I wouldn't have been introduced to my husband by this person, and this person hadn't introduced me, I wouldn't be in this situation. If only my husband hadn't gotten that job where he was introduced to pornography on the job. If only and so you literally are starting to look at every person that had anything to do with this, and you're trying to figure out, if only this wouldn't have happened, then I wouldn't be dealing with this. I could avoid this. If onlys. And you can do this. You'll notice your brain doing this. You'll notice your dreams doing this. Once again, you'll notice yourself waking up with the first thought of your mind, if only. And so it's a lot of processing. You might notice that your emotions are kind of going back and forth from anger to denial to a little bit of the pain, but you're not feeling the intense pain yet that you're going to feel. It's literally trying to figure out, how could this have been different? And that, but it's a good stage. It's a necessary stage.
Yeah, it sounds like this is the stage where a little bit more of the healthy processing is starting to come in, right? Yes. I mean, at first it's just an explosion. There's denial, there's anger. It's just kind of everything is at a 10, right? And this is where maybe you've gotten down to a 5, and you're able to kind of bring some other faculties of your mind and your heart and your reasoning, and it does feel like some of this is still just in the vein of self-protective, which makes sense, right? I'm trying to figure out, how can I keep from, crucifying myself for what this other person did to me. So it sounds like it's a little bit of that, but at a better place, right, in the process.
Yeah, I mean, it's a more like attentive place in terms of from the denial and the anger of just the raging and the intensity. But remember, in when we're dealing with sexual betrayal here, that along with this is still the desire to, what happened, tell me more, or and then the not trusting, and then the fear of, all throughout this thread is, is my marriage going to break up? Is there going to be divorce? Or do I want to even be there? And yes, you can't answer those questions at this stage either. You are literally needing to come to terms still with the reality. And you're still, and obviously, the men have dealt with the whole thing of the disclosure, and they've got their own shame and their own fears and their own anger and their own, all of that going on, and their own reactions to their wife's intensity of her anger and then her questions. But yes, in here, there could be, with the if only, there could be a lot of self-reproach, a lot of like feeling stupid if only I had noticed, if only I'd figured out, if only, there can be a lot of personal shame. There's still, it doesn't mean there is no anger in this stage. It's just that that's what you're processing.
What then does the transition look like from maybe bargaining to depression? Because, I think people hear that word depression and all of a sudden they go, oh my goodness, are we talking about clinical? Or are we, I mean, like how do you define this word in the grief process?
Well, it's depression / sadness. And this one is what people think is grief. They don't recognize all of the other parts as grief. They think that they're in grief when they feel the grief. This is the feeling of the grief. Your stomach is at your feet. You're feeling the pain and the agony in your gut of the loss. You're crying. You're feeling hopeless. You're feeling as if there's no future. You're just feeling devastated. Yes, you may feel completely depressed. Some people need antidepressants in the grief process. Now, the grief process can last a while, but if your depression lasts too long, then they may need short-term antidepressants. But this is what we think is grief. And that is what everybody knows, is that feeling of just having that deep pain, that deep loss, that sobbing, that emptiness.
Yeah, it's sadness. It's like a deep sadness, right?
Deep
Yeah.
sadness.
I remember when my dad died when I was 18, and I thought it was weird because, a year or more later, I would find myself just, walking down the bread aisle in the grocery store, and all of a sudden just I'm going, what is going on? I mean, it would hit me at the weirdest times, this just deep, deep sadness. And I think that's a little bit of what you're talking about.
Yes.
And talk a little bit about just how important it is to realize that this process can be very unpredictable.
Oh, totally. Well, now remember when you're dealing with the disclosure of the, of the affair or the sexual addiction, you're going to be in it, like in the intensity of that. So yes, it's unpredictable, but at this point, when we're discovering this, we're still going to be in the throes of this, of this whole process. But yeah, this can come back later. This is something that this process come back when you learn something new, when you experience something new, when you're exposed to something, that kind of thing. It could be, it could be a loss of not later on dealing with the loss of not being able to go to a certain family function because there's something there that's going to be a trigger, or something there that is a boundary issue or something. So yeah, it can. But right now, when you're gone through this, you're going to be kind of in the throes of this. You're going to feel that loss. It's going to be kind of continual. You're going to feel all of that sadness, and it may be tough to function in this one too, because of the intensity.
And talk a little bit about how necessary all of these stages are to get to that final stage of acceptance.
Absolutely necessary. Every one of them. Gotta feel them, gotta do it. If you don't, you're not going to have processed all of it, and the healing will not be what it needs to be. Because if you short circuit this, then you haven't dealt with all of the things that you need to deal with in order to come to that place of acceptance, hope, and restoration in your marriage.
So let's talk about those last stages there then. How does one transition kind of from depression, acceptance, and also talk a little bit about like what you just mentioned a minute ago about how, hey, listen, there can be things that trigger you, or there can be maybe even some, it almost feels like waves or layers that you're kind of going through in grief. Can you talk a little bit about that as you talk about acceptance and hope?
Yeah. So that's why I want you to recognize the grief process and realize that, if you're going to go through it at different times, when something comes back and reminds you, when something hits you with a loss, when if now hopefully at the end of all this, you're going to end up with the discovery and have all the information, but you'll go through this again when you have the disclosure. Like if you do the thing where later on there's a full disclosure, if your husband has not been able to be fully disclosing everything through this, at the point that you get that disclosure, you're going to go through some of this process and the loss again. But the sadness lingers as long as it needs to. Now, if it goes too long and you're actually stuck there and you can't function, that's when you need to definitely get some medical help, probably with some medication short term, because this shouldn't last a year. You know, you shouldn't be in bed unable to get out of bed for a year. This is something that you should be working through, and you're going to actively feel yourself. And yeah, you might come out of it a little bit and be able to take your kids to their game and be able to go to work, and then find that next weekend you're back in that place where you're crying all weekend, or you're just super sad. And for husbands to see their wife in this stage is pretty rough, because they know, I did this to her, it's my fault. So detaching and recognizing that she's got to go through it, this is part of the consequence, but being able to, he's going to grieve, hopefully, if he's healthy and he's willing to heal and be honest and fix his marriage, he will grieve as he sees her grieving. He's going to feel the sadness over her sadness, which is a positive thing. That's a healthy thing. If he is feeling regret and remorse and able to have empathy and grieve over what he caused her, that's a good thing in his recovery. So this can be pretty rough. How does it switch into the next phase, which is where you want to go, which is acceptance? It just kind of does. It just kind of is like you can begin to have a little bit of, I'm not fighting this. I'm not hating the fact that I'm dealing with this. It just sort of feels like you can go, okay, I can live. Like I can accept that this happened. Okay, I'm not going to struggle so much with, oh my gosh, my husband's a sex addict. My husband had an affair. It's like you're not fighting it. It's like, imagine if you had to have an amputation of a limb, and you're in the shock, you're in the anger. Why did this have to happen? You're in the bargaining. What if I hadn't done this? I hadn't gotten that car. I hadn't gotten in that accident. And then finally you're thinking, oh my gosh, I got to do life without my limb. I got to figure this out. This is so hard. I've got to make this. And then all of a sudden one day you go, okay, this is how I get dressed without a limb. Okay, this is how I'm going to do this without a limb. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, I have the sexual addiction. Okay, but okay, this is how I'm going to do this. It's like kind of getting hope that this is a way I'm going to be able to do this. You're not fighting it. You're not angry about it. It's kind of like, it is what it is. And then it isn't like being like, that's not like a hopeless stage. That's a hopeful stage, because it is what it is. And then it's like saying, now what? I'm not fighting it anymore. Again, here it's acceptance. Let me tell you what acceptance is. The dictionary says that acceptance is, and then this, I love this. I got so excited when I saw this. You put out your hand and you take what is offered. It's like putting out your open palm. You have the sexual addiction, the sexual betrayal put in your palm. You close your palm around it and you take it to yourself. You pull it to your chest. This is mine. I'm the wife of a sex addict. My husband had the affair. Okay. All right. The opposite of that you started off with is shock denial. That's refusal to accept it. That, the dictionary said, is putting out your hand and refusing. Putting out your hand and you're stopping it and you're saying, no, 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 not mine. Now you're way over here in this acceptance and you're going, okay, my reality. And that's basically what it is. And it is the whole reason that you're going through the grief process is to get there. And for husbands to recognize, if your wife goes through all of those processes, she's going to end up here. And the acceptance is going to give you the opportunity to move past, if you do all the other things right, which we're not talking about today. You have other podcasts.
Right.
But
Yeah, I think a lot of times people are so quick to want to get to whatever the change needs to be that they don't realize that change can only come after you have accepted reality.
Yes.
And so I think about it, and that's why I think a lot of times we have associated, rightly so, grief primarily with death, right? Because there is a sense in which you go, okay, there is a reality here that is part of my experience where this person is absent. They're not here anymore.
Yep.
And so I have to learn to accept that reality before I can then make any kind of changes or move on or whatever you want to call it. And I look at it this way too. It's not so much that grief does nothing for like changing what is, but it does a whole lot for getting you in the right position for what your next steps are going to be, what your future can look like, what change can look like, right?
Exactly. And that's what the whole idea of it is. And what is the acceptance? The acceptance is my life isn't what I thought it was. All of the losses, because you got to see, the losses that the wife is going through is the loss of those years where she thought everything was fine, that things weren't fine, that this was going on. So she's got to shift her whole reality. And to whatever extent this changes the awareness of her, what she thought her marriage was, what she thought was going on during those years, she's coming to that place where she's saying, okay, I'm accepting that it was what it was. Okay, I thought we were happy. We weren't happy. He was actually doing this sexual addiction. Okay, well, wait, maybe we did still have some good family times. We did, now remember, they're working together during this too. So the acceptance is, I'm accepting this as it is, as it was, and now I'm going to figure out how to live with it. If it's to put the marriage back together, we're going to do this together. And a lot of wives will tell their husbands, I want to make this work. I want to fix it. I want to stay together, but they don't know what that is and what that's going to look like. Well, what it looks like is that you get to acceptance and you're like, hopefully together at this point. And if if the husbands are doing their part in this is going to make this very difficult to, the wife's going to have her own acceptance of what this is, absent of him, or acceptance that the marriage isn't good, or acceptance that he's not really doing his recovery, he's not really doing what he needs to do. Then it might be an acceptance of, I don't know if my marriage is going to last. I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to be okay either way. So that's what the acceptance is. Now, the acceptance doesn't mean like a bad thing. It's not, I'm stuck with whatever. It's no, it is what it is. And then you say, now what? And that's where I like to, when you add hope. Now, what is hope? Hope for a good life, hope for a happy future, hope for a restored marriage if we're working together, hope for a place of forgiveness, hope for God to do great things out of this, hope for him, that whole idea with healing from an affair or healing from sexual addiction. It isn't that the marriage caused either one of those. The wife not having a good marriage, or the wife not being everything she needs to be, isn't what causes her husband to do that. He's 100% responsible for his own stuff. However, there are things in the marriage that can be better, more vulnerability, more honesty, a deeper relationship, maybe a recovery program together. Those kinds of things are that's in the hope of things actually being more like greater and deeper, even though you've walked through this painful valley.
And I think part of that hope too is that you are not the same person that emerges. There's a strength that comes from that. There's a wisdom. My wife likes to say it this way. She says, I could never claim ignorance after our big blow up. She's like, I can't be fooled again, in the sense that it's like, I know what I know now. So there's a sense in which wisdom grows and faith grows and then possibilities grow as far as the relationship. So I think it's all good.
And that's the whole hope of going through this process well and doing it completely and giving yourself grace. And I love being aware of it, because I just find it, like I said, from small to big things, I love being able to understand why I'm doing and feeling and thinking what it is, and that it's just part of a process. And in these difficult parts of this grief process, then I'm like, oh, this is where I'm at. Okay, I'm going to be going into this next. And you're not surprised by it.
Well, Karla, this has been a great conversation. Where can our listeners go to just get more resources and help from you?
Yep. So mine is changemyrelationship.com, and all of my books, classes, studies. I've got YouTube videos, got some podcast recordings on there. All of those are available through my website at changemyrelationship.com.
Yeah.
And I should say, I don't only deal with couples that are dealing with sexual addiction. Mine is for Christians in all difficult relationships. So there's whether, it's anything, it doesn't just have to be
Mhm.
sexual addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll be sure to have that in the show notes. And thank you so much for
You're welcome.
continuing to speak into this and helping a lot of couples out there.
You're welcome. Okay. All right. Bye,
Yeah.
Jonathan.
Well, and listeners, we're going to put all that in the show notes. And of course, as we want to help you take whatever your next best step needs to be. So please reach out to us, and we look forward to seeing you back here again next time on the Pure Sex Radio program. Take care.